dear viewers and subscribers of the channel The Russian Icon, as seen by Andrei Boldyrev. We're continuing talking about this book, The Russian Icon of the mid-17th to early 20th centuries, The Path of the Russian Icon to America, the collection of Oleg Kushnirskiy. We began our first episode on the subject with the collector Oleg Kushnirskiy, but now he was forced to leave us for a while. I'm sure we'll continue our interview with him later on. At least that's my plan. But now, since we have this convenient pause, I'd like to talk to Ilya Kushnirskiy. Ilya is Oleg's son, and I'd like to address a subject that's very important for me. I'd like to call this episode The Collector's Son. Ilya, I'm a collector myself. I have sons and daughters. And I see how you're helping your father, how you're working together, and that you clearly have your own interest in the Russian icon. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Tell me, you know, a lot of collectors that I know have no idea whom to transfer their collections to. How did you and your father build up this kind of relationship?
Well, you know, it's my personal situation, really. I was present at a lot of my dad's, not field trips, but purchases, negotiations that led to purchases. I saw people coming in, showing works of art, exchanging them. And that simply took place in our home, not in some secret room. People would come and go. I was 10 to 11 at the time. I remember these coming and goings clearly when I was 12. He already started bringing together his collection. I remember him bringing these pieces home. I remember his emotional feedback, his joy, when he would find, buy, or exchange something. He would come home, place the piece on the drawer, start photographing it. I, being a kid, would run up to see what was going on, to see it first, to touch it. Of course, he wouldn't let me touch it. He would rip the icon out of my hands. Sometimes I'd get grounded. As time went on, he would start letting me see and touch the artwork, and these pieces seemed as a divine mystery for me. As I'd examine them, he'd explain the details to me.
So, your dad's emotions really got to you?
Yes, they did.
Wonderful. And are you the only son?
I'm the only child, yes. I've got a cousin, and he grew up in our family as a brother to me. He grew up alongside me, but he didn't have that. He has totally different interests. And, of course, during the weekends my dad would tell the stories about going off to the flea market, buying all kinds of stuff. There was a lot of interest in antiques. On my side, I saw the life, I was interested in it. And that when I started developing an interest in art. In art overall, not in collecting. Honestly, I'm not that interested in collecting. I don't have the love for collecting. But I'm good at evaluating works of art. And my yearning for art was born back then. I remember that at the age of 13 to 14 I started frequenting museums. On my own accord. No one drove me there.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
I remember the first time when we had a school field trip to the Met Museum in New York 8th grade. My parents took me there before. But one day I said, "Mom, can I start going there by myself?"
What were you interested in art?
I was interested in the old masters.
The Dutch? The Italians?
Yes, the Dutch, the Italians, the Spaniards. But most of all, El Greco. He was the real wow. I was and am really emotional about it. And when I saw my dad acquiring icons, I looked intensely into every scene, into every detail. What every depicted character was up to. I wanted to compare the artworks. It was only the comparisons of a novice. But I wanted to compare them to Bruegel, in the sense that there's so much going on in the artworks. The characters are moving. Again, my father was infatuated with the icons that depicted the hagiographies and fests, each with a plethora of scenes.
And what education did you get later on?
I've got several degrees. I first majored in linguistics, as a translator from Italian.
You know Italian, English, Russian, or do you know even more languages?
I know Spanish as well. Later on, I majored in business.
So, no art degree?
No art degree. But since I was 13, my brain got overturned in a way. Since I was 13 to 14, I was infatuated with museums. I used to visit a museum every weekend.
This is the first time that I'm seeing such a person. Honestly.
Well, I'm honest. When I was 15 to 16, I frequented the Brooklyn Museum. They have the largest collection of Rodin in the world. They've got an entire floor of Rodin. I simply went there, looking at Rodin. Sculptures, sculptures, sculptures. I liked the idea of having looked at something properly. I spent time there. I liked coming there and wandering among the works of art. That got me on.
I respect you, seriously.
Even now, when Nikolai Zadorozny organized the tour for us today, and this is my first time in this museum, my first reaction was not even about examining every corner or finding out all that I can, but about the yearning desire of coming back here again. I began thinking about the time when I come back here. Tomorrow, the day after. I want to come back here, looking into every artwork.
Wonderful.
That's what I like about museums.
Wonderful. But that must find a way of funneling out. This interest of yours, it must show somehow. Am I wrong?
I don't know. I think that my work today, well.
What is your work today, by the way?
I'm in charge of a logistics company, which excels in the transportation of artwork. It actually gives me great advantages. Major advantages. For example, I've spent the last 2 years in a car. I've made it through every road in the US. I've personally delivered artwork with my assistant. I've packed everything personally. I've personally built up my clientele. And I understood one thing. When I talk to people who are interested in transporting works of art, valuables, doesn't matter, it can be ancient Egyptian sculptures, or other items, or paintings. Pause 1-5, or things of emotional significance, I don't know, maybe a painting that someone's daughter created. Pause 1-5, well, I find common ground and understanding with these people very quickly. And I gain their trust. If I see porcelain, I understand what kind of porcelain it is. It can be other things.
Leningrad porcelain, Chinese vases, right?
Right. But I understand the owners. I have the empathy. I had a very funny case once. We came to a client, Dad's associate came with me, an expert in packing. And we've been talking to the client, a lady, for like 5 minutes, and then she says, "I want you to pack it." I pointed to the expert and said, "He's super cool." She says, "No, I want you to do it. Let him assist you." It was funny. A person who's literally a god of packing. But no, she wants me to pack her things. Because I understand that it's very delicate German porcelain, that you need to treat it with such care, not to break a finger off a porcelain figure, to avoid future restoration. I grew up in these conditions.
We don't have that here in Russia.
I like the atmosphere I grew up in. I appreciate the fact that my father shared these experiences with me, that he didn't hide his work from me, that it wasn't some kind of parallel secret life for him.
You know, here in Russia, we really don't get kids into the world of collecting, as if they're almost ashamed of it.
I talked to a lot of very different people in Russia, and there's a very important moment for me. The collection website that I created. My original idea was to create it, build it up, to gain the competence I needed, and of course, to find the masterpieces that I wanted. But everyone can be driven by such emotions. I'm sure that you, being a collector, dream of finding some kind of unique emerald, let's say. But I understood one thing. In Russia, you find people that purchase an icon for themselves, and they do treat it like a relic. And negotiating with them is impossible. They'll be willing to sell everything, their last underwear, and only then their icon.
Well, it depends on the person. There are different people.
Well, as far as I see it, you can buy icons here. You've got professionals, dealers, collectors, antique shops. Of course, it's a business. People will always want to buy an icon for a gift. But I kept working on popularizing my website, RussianIcon.com. I wanted for ordinary people to come to me. Not the connoisseurs, but ordinary people seeking expertise. You know, I felt that it's a bit of sin. I won't be afraid to say it.
I understand.
Because someone is bringing you his or her icon, and it's not the same as buying it from some Italian, let's say, who merely bought it as another work of art. It's a totally different perception. People see it differently. Some hypothetical Italian might have bought an icon, paid $30,000 for it if it's a great piece, a museum-quality piece. And now he needs money. And sells it. But he doesn't have spiritual ties with the icon. He might understand its beauty, its history, but not share the spirit. And here it's different. And seeing that I stopped popularizing my website in the way that I thought I would originally, hoping to find someone who would bring me an exquisite piece. Because I realized that for a Russian an icon is sacred.
Yes, that's very true.
Literally. Even if a Russian person doesn't understand anything in icons, for him or her it's automatically something more than just a painting.
Of course.
And that's what I really found out for myself, from personal experience.
It's interesting what you said, that this sentiment is absent in the West, that, let's say, Italians don't have that feeling, because it was always so clear to me. What you're saying now, I think everywhere is like that.
I studied in Italy. For a year, in an Italian university. And I remember there was this guy, we went to a political sciences class together, he was a bit older than me. And we became friends. His girlfriend was an acquaintance of mine. Well, I came over to his place once and I saw an entire wall of icons. Literally. An entire wall covered in icons. I called my dad immediately, saying, "Dad, can you believe I'm at this Italian guy's home, and he has an entire wall covered in icons?" And Dad says, "Yes, they love them. They came to New York to the gallery a lot. I even knew several collectors. They love them." But my friend didn't understand anything in icons. He didn't even properly understand what they were. He said, "Mom is collecting them, buys them." His father was the owner of a Portuguese oil company. They were very well off. The mom, her son. So, if and when his mom dies, God forbid, the collection will pass to him. And it's clear that he'll simply bring up for sale, and he'll sell it for how much the dealers will tell him to. It's not only about the financial gain or loss, it's about having no emotional ties with the pieces. No ties at all. I remember that visit. I was 19. And it stayed with me.
And your son?
No, my son is very distant from this entire sphere.
So, you have two generations, but the third didn't inherit the interest.
I have a very different situation. I'm divorced. I divorced when my son was 2 years old.
Oh, so you don't have that much influence over your son?
My son and I have a very strong emotional bond. We're constantly in touch, we're in regular contact, we're always talking. He's a professional athlete, among the top 5 swimmers in the US in his age group. I'm always emotionally with him, trying to support him. I'm proud of him, it's important for me. I have a great relationship with his family. He lives with his mom and stepdad. We've got a great relationship with all his relatives. We spend the holidays together. I try to be close to him. I've tried taking him to museums. We went a couple of times. Had a great time. But it didn't touch him the way it touched me. I remember how my dad took me to the Hermitage for the first time. I was 6 at the time. Of course, I can't remember everything, but this I remember. I remember the halls. I remember my dad taking a picture of me, standing before a Murillo painting. I even remember the exact painting, a boy with some jug. It was a very memorable experience. But with my son it's different. It didn't touch him that way. He's about sports, friends, this kind of brotherhood. And I was more about cinema. When I was 13 to 14, I began to read. I like literature, all kinds of literature. We're different. Maybe one day something will change with my son, and he'll see the value of it all. On my part, I'm very grateful to my dad, including for the fact that I spent 10 years in music school. And I had a brilliant teacher, Gennady Kupisak. He taught clarinet in the Leningrad Conservatory. He taught Igor Butman how to play the sax. He was a real genius. And, of course, if he hadn't emigrated to the States, I couldn't have ever become his student. I remember when I was 12 to 13 years old, playing the trumpet, I told him, "I'm no good." And he said, "Don't worry. In the future, when you're 50, you can come to the symphony and truly appreciate the music. That's why you're learning how to play." I think that for me, the world of art, my dad's collection, the Russian icons, everything that Dad brought into the house and shared, it's the same thing. And the latter is the most important, that Dad shared his experiences, his passion, he showed me the icons, I was present when he photographed them. Recently, I've been to Madrid. Briefly, for 2 days. And I went to Prada and began looking at religious art. It was far earlier there, in Spain. And I was walking around, looking.
But they're not icons.
They're not icons. And yet again, they are. Can't phrase it any other way, not icons, but icons. That's the best possible answer.
So, this field is yours?
I think so. I saw something spiritual. You see, you understand, you feel. It all happens in its own time. In Russia, it came later. I'm not even talking about art history, but history per se, the history of how it was all reborn, how it all happened. Everything happens in its own time. Nikolai Zadorojny brought me into the Greek hall of the Museum of the Russian Icon. He showed me Greek icons that Mikhail Abramov gathered. And they're completely different from Russian icons. I said, "Look, Nikolai, they're so different from ours." And he affirmed it, saying, "Yes, totally different painting style. Everything is different. But still there is a parallel."
You know, since we're gathered here in this kind of company, you, your father, Nikolai Zadorojny, Sergei Hodorkovsky, and we start talking about the Russian icons as a phenomenon, that's one thing. But if we have a sit-down with a Byzantine scholar, do you know what he'll say? That the Russian icon is merely a provincial, later-day version of a Byzantine icon. That it's not its own form of art. I saw these people, I talked to them, and that's how they treat the Russian icon. You see? That it's some 63rd diocese of Byzantium, located far off in the northwest.
Well, from the point of view of history, they might be right in their own way. I don't know. I don't have the knowledge. I'm not an art historian, honestly. But when I see a Russian icon, for me it's a separate phenomenon. For me, it's a discovery of its own.
I understand. I'm just telling you what professional Byzantinist scholars say about the Greek and Russian icons, how they view our iconography.
Well, maybe they judge from their own professional aspect. Maybe they're not interested in discovery. They're more interested in parallels and sources. Who took when and why?
Well, we had Theophanes the Greek. He worked in Russia, and he was, well, Greek.
The funniest thing is that I have no proper knowledge of any of these facts. Honestly.
Well, yes, the icon came to Russia from Byzantium. But, in my opinion, isn't of any special relevance here, since I'm not an art historian, but I think that our icon is, well, Russian.
It is different. For example, when you go to the Met Museum, I was there about a month ago. You're walking through the halls of medieval art, 12th century, Italian masters, and then wham, you're seeing a Marian icon. And you understand that it's Russian. You can't mistake it for anything.
I'm not talking about that, actually. I'm talking about the fact that our icons, they express something of their own.
I think so too. Absolutely. Again, I'm not an art historian, but I agree.
That's why when they say that it's something provincial and secondary in relation to the Byzantine icon,
it can be secondary from the point of view of history. I don't know what to compare it to. It's like clothing, a t-shirt, I don't know. Something came from something. But it's its own contribution. You can't take that away. You're bound to accept elements from other entities. The scholars must draw some parallel where the history of iconography originates, where the first masters came from. My father has a friend, a collector, who has a wonderful collection of icons. And he delved into the subject deeply. My dad, for example, never got that deep into history. And this person studied the literature on the subject, studied icons. And I remember one discussion at which I was present. This person said, "Why can't they paint an icon nowadays as they did in the 16th century? Why? We know the technique. We can copy all of the pigments." I remember I was 15. and I really started interacting with him. Then I turned 16. The guy was a professional racer. I think he was from Sverdlovsk. His name was Leo Uritsky. He taught me how to drive, how to do it properly, hold the wheel, etc. I learned driving from him. And I remember his explanation of why you can't paint an icon like they did in the 16th century. Because the air is different, the food is different, the toilet is different. And the artist must breathe that air, eat that food. He must sit at that table, and then what he does will be different.
Well, first and foremost, the lighting was different. There was no electricity. That's the simplest explanation.
Well, it reflects it, doesn't it? You can't compare, calling one thing primitive, secondary. Everything is unique, because it can't be replicated. Because the land is different, the food is different, the hut is different. Some elements coincide, of course. That's how I see it.
But aside from that,
The spirit is completely different.
well, of course, if you've never watched a single episode of Malahov on Russian TV, you have a better chance of painting a purer icon than a person who at least took a glimpse at such a show.
Although Malahov is a great guy. I've met him at an exhibition once.
I'm not judging what kind of person he is. I'm saying that taking even a glimpse at his show takes a radical toll on the person's conscience. It will change you, despite the light.
But everything was different back then. Last year, I went on this interesting expedition along the Yenisei River down to Norilsk. And we went to an old believer village. Of course, they're not like they used to be.
Not like the Likov family?
Well, the Likov family are a phenomenon. It's not a global thing. People lived in communes. There are small villages there. And you go into those villages, you feel their spirit. Even the pies they bake are different. They're not like the ones that we just had. You can't get rid of authenticity. Something might seem primitive. So what? I don't think that saying that Russian icons seem at times more primitive in comparison to Byzantium is degrading in any way. You get me, right?
Because primitive is real, right?
Of course. Take Basquiat, the artist. To be honest, I'm not a fan of this super modern art. I don't even consider it to be proper art. But it's there. And what's the difference? The artist put an effort to his work.
Did he, though?
Well, what's the difference if the people liked it? That's something totally different. It's incomparable. People invested their soul. And what's the difference what comes from what? Something might have come from Byzantium. So what? What does that change? I don't know whether I'm properly conveying the emotion, but what does that change? But okay, someone will dub it primitive. Byzantium had something in the 13th century, we got it by the 15th. But still, what we had here, it's different. Because people here saw it differently.
It's really interesting talking to you, you know? Truly.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you. I've never spoken for so long and so intensely with an American.
That sounds funny.
Well, what can I do?
No, it's true.
There is so much new information. The fact that you began exploring art at the age of 6. It's incredible, in my opinion.
Well, I have a theory about that. My father is from a small Ukrainian provincial town, Melnitsky. When he was 15, he made it out to St. Petersburg. He dreamt of that city, it captivated him. When he was a kid, he visited the city with my grandmother. And St. Petersburg overtook him. He wanted to stay there. Once again, I know that from my grandma. She's 85 and alive and well, thank goodness. And she told me the story. When they came there, he became a pharmacology student, how they began visiting museums, theaters.
Amazing.
I think that his yearning to have something that he didn't have as a kid, they didn't have museums and theaters in his hometown, that got him on the hook, and he used all of his resources to.
Yes, that's clear enough. But what about you?
I think it's my dad's achievement, undoubtedly. 100%. My mom is a native of St. Petersburg. And my mom's family is rooted in St. Petersburg, I don't know how many generations. So, the St. Pete's way of life is normal for my mom. But for my dad it was a phenomenon. He came to consume these experiences. He loved it. I remember how he took me to the Hermitage. And again, he is a photographer. He worked in his laboratory. And he took photos everywhere he went. Even in museums. He took me to the Russian Museum as well. And that's how I grew up to be a consumer of art. Dad took me to museums and Mom to theaters. That's how it was. And the most interesting thing is that we had this one church in St. Petersburg. And my mom is an ethnic German, and my dad is a Jew.
And so, that makes you Russian?
Yes, that makes me Russian. And that's not a joke. The funny thing is that my dad took me to the synagogue, and Mom didn't take me anywhere. But there was this church.
The Protestant one on the Nevsky Prospect?
No, this church is. The Pioneer Scouts house, where I went, near the Tauride Garden. Mom used to take me there. To the Pioneer Scouts house. And I wanted to go into that church.
An Orthodox church?
Yes, to the Orthodox one. And we would go in, light candles. And that was such a memorable experience for me. I didn't have any association with the religious people, the truly religious ones who would go almost every day. But I had some level of spirituality. I was 8 years old, my grandmother was ill. And my mom and I went hand in hand to light a candle for her. And the scent of that place, the overall state. You might walk in there for 5 to 10 minutes and then leave. But suddenly it's like, bam! And you're back. And that experience is still with me. Even now I drop into St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, just for 5 minutes. Come in, look around, leave. To some Orthodox church, I have especially strong associations with that, of course. The smaller the church, the better, in some village, with wooden floors. Nikolai Zadoraji just walked me into the chapel that they salvaged and brought into the museum. You walk in, and it's like you've left this world for 5 minutes. It's an apparition. I don't know, honestly, I'm not a religious person. But my friend Sergei Khodorkovsky explained this feeling to me. You understand that thousands and thousands of people came here. They brought their fates here. And this Russian word, namoleno, filled with prayer, is a very important. There's something there. A lot of people coming there, bringing something with them.
I don't know about that. I'm an Orthodox Christian. That's why I don't think the people aren't the main thing. It's God. It's not how many people were there. It's built from the top, not the bottom.
You think so?
I think so.
Well, maybe.
And the people just answer the call, come to the presence. That's my opinion.
I had this case, a close friend. I'd lived for several years in Latin America. I worked as a real estate agent, curated advertising campaigns. And I remember my friend's dad dying. My friend came over and said, "Let's go light a candle. Is there an Orthodox church here?" It was in Panama. I said, "Yes, there is." We came to the church. There was a Russian priest, Father Alexander. We came into the church, my friend lit the candle, and we had a 10-minute chat. Just 10 minutes. But I remember it to this day. I remember Father Alexander saying a very funny thing: anyone can be a saint. Saint Seraphim of Seraph said that anyone can be a saint, and it's very easy. Just become 1 inch. Just become one. Take that step. And I remembered this discussion, our conversation. And just a few days ago my friend called me and said, "Father Alexander is in St. Petersburg. Do you want to meet him?" I called him up. We talked for like 20 minutes. I told him, I still remember the conversation that we had. And he says, "Well, you see, it's enough just to come over." That was so deep. Philosophical. I think that sometimes it's enough to make one single step. To give a hand. To do something. To come to church. You pass by a church, a lot of people pass it by. Take a chance, walk in. I don't know, it's very personal. I try to partake of this life. But I think the decisive thing is my father's approach, how he behaved when I was a kid. That laid the foundations. That's what I think. What I think.
That's great. Well, I think we had a great chat. This episode, The Collector's Son, is a success. I'm sure our viewers will like it.
Super. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. On my part, I'd like to say that I've witnessed collectors dying, and I saw what happened to their collections. I've made shows about that on my channel. And we talked about what to do with collections, how to secure them, what to be ready for when the collector passes. It's one thing when it's merely assets. When you have assets, you're able to decide what goes to charity, what goes to your daughter, to her son, to your son, to other people. You write your will and forget about it. And a collection is far more than that. Of course, you can bring it together and treat it like an asset.
You shouldn't do that.
Of course, it's better to collect diamonds in that case. They'll be judged by their purity, other parameters, and there, you'll have your collection of diamonds, and they'll cost something.
100%.
But if you're really into something art, antiques, you're dealing with living history. And these pieces take on a totally different meaning. They're not only seen as objects of material value. And then, when you think about it, what does it mean to bring together a collection? It takes immense labor, immense effort. You need experience, luck, joys and sorrows, especially when you buy a fake, or when you lose something, when an icon just falls and breaks. That's a nightmare. Each of the pieces you bring together, they stop existing as individual pieces and start to live as a collection.
If you'll allow me to intervene. When I was on the Yenisei River, there, in this small town, there was a museum of planes, tools. Someone created it. There are like 10 rooms in there. Thousands of planes. And you walk in and think, how much does this cost? Well, how much can a plane cost? But it's not about the price of a tool, but the price of the unique collection as a whole, something brought together by a collector. When pieces are brought together into a collection, they start living a new life. They start existing as a single entity. An antique is just an antique. And you're right, a 10-carat diamond can cost $1 million, it's a set price. And that's its only value, $1 million. People won't go to see it, they won't get any emotions out of it, there is no secondary value, nothing. It is what it is. You can sell it, barter it. I think that collectors that collect only for the sake of the price, well, of course they can bring together a collection, but
There's a great collecting method, collecting banknotes by number.
well, you know, I've been to Mexico, there's the Carlos Slim Museum, Somaya. That's a Mexican billionaire. He created a museum, made it free. And his motto was, I want to create a museum for the people. He bought masterpieces across the world. He has everything, old masters, impressionists, contemporary artists. Everything. There's a giant hall dedicated to Rodin. He just bought an entire hall of Rodin works. He's not a collector. He just bought it. Again, with a purpose to create a museum. He wanted to create a free museum for the people. That was his idea. And again, it's a museum, not an individual collection.
I see. It's like he bought it in a supermarket, wrap it up, deliver it, put it there.
Yes, of course, the museum looks stunning. Absolutely. But it's like going and seeing artwork at an auction.
Right, right.
It's not the same as if someone personally brought it together. You spoke about uniforms. I'm sure that if you look at that collection, I'll get a totally different experience. A museum is a museum. An individual collection still has its own value. That's why when it, well, falls apart, it's very sad. Doesn't matter what the collection is, because it's something solid, something whole that you can perceive.
One way or another, the system doesn't consist of a sum of elements. It's always greater than the sum of comprising elements. As an example, if you take apart a car and lay the pieces on the asphalt, it's just like, I don't know, 1,500 pieces. But it's not a car. You can take a person apart, fingers, feet, ears. But that's not a living human being. But all of it assembled in order is a human being. Or a car. Bricks are bricks, and a home is a home.
Yes, plus I think that when a professional brings together a collection, he has some specific purpose. This method of collecting, by period, let's say, is professional, interesting, legitimate, so to speak. It works. And when you personally bring together a collection, it takes in a major part of you. You can't take that away.
Yes.
My dad wanted to collect icons depicting feasts. He loves to look at the details and depicted elements. What he saw before. What he wanted to see in his book. It's not the same as buying expensive icons from some chosen period.
But, as you know, in order to appreciate music, you need to be taught to play the trumpet by someone who taught Butman to play the sax. And then you'll be able to come and appreciate the collection.
Gina Kupisak still teaches kids to play music, by the way.
Well, he told you that at the age of 50 you'll come and appreciate the music. That's quite a level of culture, you know. Very good. I've met the collector's son. It was really a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
Thank you.